The lantern's flame flickered to life in Clara Oakes's calloused hands as she stood on the porch of her small homestead, watching the sun bleed crimson across the Nevada sky in the summer of 1882. Completely unaware that the stranger who would change everything was already riding toward White Pine with nothing but a bedroll and a promise he had made to a dying friend. She had learned the hard way that darkness brought danger in this unforgiving land. 6 months ago, her father had been killed by outlaws who had come in the night, finding their homestead blind and vulnerable. Since that terrible evening, Clara had made it her ritual to light every lantern she owned at dusk, hanging them from the porch posts, the fence rails, even from the branches of the old cottonwood tree near the well. The warm glow created a beacon that could be seen for miles across the flat Nevada plains, a declaration that this home was vigilant, that whoever lived here would not be caught unaware again. At 22 years old, Clara had inherited more than just the land and the modest house her father had built. She had inherited his stubbornness, his determination to carve out a life in this harsh territory despite everything that pushed against survival. The drought had been merciless that year, and her small herd of cattle had dwindled to just 8 head. She worked from dawn until well past dark, mending fences, hauling water from the creek 2 miles away, trying to coax vegetables from the stubborn soil. Her hands bore the evidence of her labor, rough and scarred, and her face had been bronzed by the relentless sun. The town of White Pine lay 7 miles to the east, a collection of weathered buildings clustered along the main road that led to the silver mines. Clara made the journey once a week to trade eggs and whatever vegetables she could spare for supplies she could not produce herself. The townspeople regarded her with a mixture of pity and admiration. A young woman alone on a homestead was unusual, and many had predicted she would give up and move back east or marry one of the ranchers who had made offers. But Clara had refused them all. This land was her father's dream, and she would honor his memory by making it thrive. As she lit the 4th lantern, she heard the sound of hooves on the hard, packed road. Clara's hand instinctively went to the rifle that leaned against the porch rail. She had learned to be cautious with strangers. The rider came into view as the sun dipped lower, a tall figure on a paint horse, moving at an easy pace. He did not have the look of an outlaw. His posture was relaxed, and he made no attempt to approach quickly or with aggression. Still, Clara kept her hand on the rifle. The rider stopped at the edge of the circle of light cast by her lanterns, and she could see him more clearly now. He was young, perhaps a few years older than herself, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face weathered by sun and wind. He wore trail dust like a second skin, and his clothes spoke of long days in the saddle. "Evening, madam," he called out, his voice carrying a warm timbre that somehow cut through Clara's immediate suspicion. "I don't mean to intrude. I am looking for the Oakes homestead. Thomas Oakes." Clara's throat tightened at her father's name. "Thomas Oakes is dead, has been for 6 months. The rider removed his hat, and in the lantern light she saw genuine sorrow cross his features. "I am sorry to hear that. I am Caleb Quinn. Your father and I worked together in the silver mines in Colorado 3 years back. He saved my life during a cave-in, got me out when the timber started giving way. I promised him that if he ever needed help, I would come. I have been working a cattle drive that just finished in California, and I rode this way to make good on that promise." Clara studied him carefully. Her father had told stories about his time in the Colorado mines, about the men he had worked alongside, the dangers they had faced together. She had a vague memory of him mentioning a young man named Caleb, someone he had spoken of with respect. "You are too late for your promise," Clara said, but her voice lacked the harshness she intended. The sincerity in his face disarmed her. "I can see that," Caleb said quietly. He looked around at the lanterns, at the well-maintained fence and the neat little house. "You are managing the place yourself." "I am. That takes considerable courage. It takes considerable necessity," Clara corrected. "Do you need water for your horse? There is a trough by the barn." Caleb nodded his thanks and dismounted, leading his horse toward the barn. Clara watched him go, noting the way he moved with an easy confidence, the way he spoke gently to his horse. When he returned, she had lit the last of the lanterns, and the homestead glowed like a small constellation against the darkening landscape. "You light all these every night?" Caleb asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Every night at dusk? That is a lot of work, a lot of lamp oil too." "It is necessary. The night my father died, we had no warning. They came in darkness and we could not see them coming. Now anyone approaching can be seen long before they reach the house, and anyone with ill intentions knows this place is watched and ready." Caleb looked at the lanterns with new understanding, his expression softening. "Smart. Hard on you to maintain, but smart. I do what I must." He stood there for a moment as if weighing his words carefully. "I made a promise to your father. I know he is gone, but that does not release me from my word. If you need help with the homestead, I would like to offer my labor. I have experience with cattle, with building and mending. I do not expect payment beyond meals and a place to sleep if you have a barn or shed." Clara's first instinct was to refuse. She had learned not to trust easily, and a stranger offering help often came with strings attached. But there was something in Caleb Quinn's eyes, a straightforward honesty that reminded her of her father. And the truth was, she needed help desperately. The fence on the north side needed replacing before winter. The roof of the barn had a leak she could not reach. There were a dozen tasks that required strength and skill beyond what she possessed. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "You do not owe me anything. I owe your father my life. That is not a debt I take lightly. If I can help his daughter keep the dream he worked for, that seems the least I can do." Clara considered this. She looked at the darkening sky, at her lanterns burning bright, at this stranger who had ridden into her life with an offer that seemed too good to be real. But desperation had a way of making decisions easier. "You can sleep in the barn," she said finally. "There is a stall that is clean and has fresh straw. I will bring you supper. Tomorrow we will talk about what needs doing." Caleb smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face into something warmer. "Thank you, madam. I appreciate your trust." "I have not decided to trust you yet," Clara said, "but I am willing to see if you are a man of your word." "That is fair." She turned to go inside, then paused. "And stop calling me madam. My name is Clara." "Clara," he repeated, and somehow the way he said it made her name sound different, almost melodic. "I am pleased to meet you, even under these circumstances." That night, Clara brought him a plate of beans and cornbread, along with a cup of coffee. Caleb had made himself comfortable in the barn, arranging his bedroll in the empty stall and tending to his horse with the care of someone who respected animals. As she handed him the plate, their fingers brushed briefly, and Clara felt an unexpected jolt at the contact. She pulled her hand back quickly, disconcerted by her reaction. "This is generous," Caleb said. "Smells wonderful. It is simple fare. Simple fare tastes like a feast when you have been eating trail rations for 3 months. Clara allowed herself a small smile. "Well then, I hope it lives up to expectations." She left him to his meal and returned to the house, but she found herself unable to settle. Through the window, she could see the warm glow of her lanterns, and beyond them, the faint light of the lantern Caleb had lit in the barn. Something about his presence changed the feeling of the homestead. For 6 months, She had been utterly alone, carrying the weight of survival entirely on her shoulders. Now there was someone else here, someone who claimed to want to help without expecting anything in return. Clara had learned to be skeptical of such claims. But as she lay in bed that night, listening to the familiar sounds of the Nevada night, she felt something she had not experienced in a long time. It was not quite hope, but it was close. Perhaps it was simply the relief of knowing that tomorrow she would not have to face every challenge alone. Morning came with the rooster's crow, and Clara woke before dawn as she always did. She dressed quickly in her work clothes, practical canvas pants and a worn cotton shirt that had belonged to her father, and made her way to the kitchen. When she stepped out onto the porch with a bucket to fetch water from the well, she found that someone had already done it. 3 full buckets sat on the porch, and she could see Caleb working near the barn, feeding the chickens she kept in the coop beside it. She walked over to him, curious and slightly annoyed that he had started without her direction. "You are up early." Caleb turned, and she saw that he had already been at work for some time. His shirt was damp with sweat despite the cool morning air. "Old habits from the trail. I figured I could get started on the chores while you had a chance to rest." "I do not need rest. This is my homestead." "I did not mean any offense," he said quickly. "I just wanted to be useful." Clara softened slightly. She was not used to help, and her pride made her bristle at the suggestion that she needed it. But the full water buckets and the fed chickens meant she could start on other tasks sooner. "What else have you done?" "Just the water and the chickens. I did not want to overstep. I thought you could show me what needs doing most." She nodded, appreciating his deference. "The north fence is falling down. It needs replacing before the cattle wander off. I have been meaning to get to it for weeks, but there are always more immediate concerns." "I can do that. Do you have materials, or do we need to cut timber?" "There is timber from a dead cottonwood that came down in a storm last spring. I have been cutting it into fence posts, but I have only managed about half of what is needed." "Then, that is where I will start. Show me where the timber is and what tools you have." They worked together that morning, Clara showing Caleb where everything was stored, explaining her system for managing the homestead. He listened carefully, asking questions that showed he understood the complexities of maintaining a small ranch alone. By midday, he had cut more fence posts than Clara had managed in the previous 2 weeks, his experience and strength making quick work of the task. Clara prepared a simple lunch of bread and cheese, and they sat in the shade of the porch to eat. The heat of the day was building, and the Nevada sun beat down without mercy. "You have kept this place running well," Caleb observed, looking around at the tidy yard, the repaired barn, the healthy chickens. "Your father would be proud." The words hit Clara harder than she expected, and she had to look away to hide the sudden emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "I hope so," she managed. "I know so. Thomas talked about you all the time when we worked together. He was so proud of how smart you were, how determined. He said you had more grit than most men he knew. He said that many times. He worried about leaving you alone to manage, but he also believed you could do anything you set your mind to." Clara had not cried since her father's death. She had been too busy surviving, too focused on the endless tasks that kept the homestead running. But hearing these words from someone who had known her father, who carried his memory and his regard, broke something loose inside her. Tears came before she could stop them. Caleb did not try to comfort her with empty words. He simply sat beside her, a solid presence, and let her cry. When the tears finally subsided, he handed her a clean bandana from his pocket. "I am sorry," Clara said, wiping her face. "I do not usually." "You do not have to apologize for grief," Caleb said gently. "It is clear you loved him very much. He was all I had. My mother died when I was young, and it was just the two of us for so long. When he died, it felt like the whole world had shifted beneath my feet. I cannot imagine how difficult that has been." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of comfortable quiet that sometimes exists between people who understand loss. Clara found herself wanting to know more about this man who had appeared so suddenly in her life. "You said my father saved your life in the mine," she said. "What happened?" Caleb leaned back against the porch post, his eyes distant with memory. "We were working a new shaft, and the foreman had rushed the timbering because he wanted to hit a vein he was sure was just ahead. Your father knew it was not safe, said the supports were not strong enough, but the foreman would not listen. We had been in there for maybe an hour when the roof started to crack. Most of the men got out, but a beam came down and pinned my leg. I was trapped, and the whole shaft was coming down. Everyone else ran, but your father came back. He lifted that beam somehow, got me free, and dragged me out just as the whole thing collapsed. We both could have died. He risked his life for mine without hesitation." Clara could picture it perfectly. That was exactly the kind of man her father had been, someone who acted when others fled, who valued honor above safety. "After that," Caleb continued, "we worked together for another 6 months before he left to come here. He talked about his dream of having his own land, of building something permanent. I was young and restless then, wanted to see more of the world, so I did not come with him. But I told him that if he ever needed me, I would come. I have thought about that promise many times over the years. When I finally got free of the cattle drive and made my way here, I hoped I would find him living his dream. Instead, I find you, carrying it forward alone. I am not sure how much longer I can carry it," Clara admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "The drought has been terrible. The cattle are struggling. I have barely enough to get through the winter. Then it is good I am here. 2 people can manage better than one. You cannot stay forever. You must have your own plans, your own life to get back to." Caleb met her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I have no ties anywhere. I have spent the last 3 years drifting from job to job, never staying anywhere long. Maybe it is time I stopped drifting." The implications of his words hung in the air between them, and Clara found herself both frightened and strangely hopeful. She was not sure what to say, so she simply stood and gathered the lunch plates. "The afternoon is not getting any cooler," she said. "We should get back to work." Over the following days, a rhythm developed between them. Caleb worked on the fence while Clara tended the garden and the animals. They ate meals together, sharing stories of their pasts, gradually learning the shapes of each other's lives. Clara discovered that Caleb had grown up in Missouri, the son of a farmer who had lost everything in the war. He had been just 15 when his parents died of fever, and he had been on his own ever since, working whatever jobs he could find to survive. He discovered that Clara had been educated beyond what was common for women on the frontier. Her father had insisted she learn to read and write, to understand numbers and contracts. He had wanted her to have opportunities, even if those opportunities were limited by her gender and their circumstances. As they worked side by side, Clara became aware of small things about Caleb. The way he hummed tunelessly while he worked, the gentle manner he had with the animals, the thoughtfulness with which he approached every task, making sure it was done right rather than done quickly. And there were moments when she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something warm and wondering that made her heart beat faster. 2 weeks after his arrival, a storm rolled in from the west, bringing the first rain in months. Clara stood on the porch watching the precious water fall, and Caleb came to stand beside her. Lightning split the sky and thunder rolled across the plains. "This will help the land," he said, "if it does not wash everything away. Sometimes the storms here are too much, too fast." As if to prove her point, the wind picked up, driving the rain sideways. One of the lanterns hanging from the porch post swung wildly, and Caleb reached out to steady it. His arm brushed against Clara's, and she was acutely aware of his nearness, of the warmth radiating from him despite the cool wind. "Your lanterns," he said softly. "You have lit my path every night since I arrived. That first evening, when I rode up and saw all these lights burning against the darkness, I knew I had made the right decision to come here. It felt like a welcome, like maybe I had finally found a place where I belonged." Clara turned to look at him, and in the flicker of the lantern light, she saw everything she had been trying to ignore for the past 2 weeks. The kindness in his eyes, the strength in his presence, the way he had seamlessly become part of the life she had built here. And more than that, she saw something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She saw the same longing she felt reflected back at her. "Caleb," she started, but he interrupted her gently. "You have lit my path," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Now walk it with me." The words hung between them, a question and an invitation and a declaration all at once. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She had been alone for so long, had convinced herself that she did not need anyone, that she was better off managing on her own. But standing here with this man who had come to honor a debt to her father and stayed because of something else entirely, she realized that she had been lying to herself. "I do not know how," she whispered. "I have been alone for so long. I do not know how to let someone else in." "Neither do I," Caleb admitted, "but I would like to learn. With you." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she did not move, he cupped her face gently in his hand. His touch was warm and calloused and impossibly tender. Clara found herself leaning into it, her eyes closing for just a moment. When she opened them again, Caleb was looking at her with such open affection that it took her breath away. Without letting herself think about all the reasons she should not, Clara rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was a soft kiss, tentative and sweet, tasting of rain and possibility. Caleb's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Clara felt something inside her that had been tightly locked finally open. When they pulled apart, both were breathless. "Clara," Caleb said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "Stay," she said simply. "Not just to help with the homestead. Stay with me. There is nowhere else I want to be." The rain continued through the night, soaking into the parched earth, bringing life back to the land. Inside the house, Clara and Caleb sat by the fire, talking late into the night about what their future might look like. They spoke of practical things like expanding the herd and planting more crops, but beneath those plans ran a current of something deeper, the beginning of a bond that would grow stronger with time. In the days that followed, everything changed and nothing changed at all. They still worked side by side from dawn until dusk, still shared meals on the porch, still lit the lanterns together as the sun set. But now, there were stolen moments of tenderness woven through the work. A hand on the small of her back as they passed each other. A smile meant only for him. The brush of fingers as they reached for the same tool. 3 weeks after that kiss in the rain, Caleb rode into White Pine to get supplies. Clara had given him a list and money from the small amount she had saved, trusting him with both. While he was gone, she found herself anxious, worried that perhaps he would not return, that this had all been too good to be true. But when she saw him riding back as the sun began to set, his horse laden with supplies, relief flooded through her so powerfully she had to sit down. He had brought everything on her list, and a few things besides. A new bolt of fabric that he thought would make a nice dress, a small bag of peppermints, a rare luxury, and a book of poetry that he had found in the general store. I remembered you said your father taught you to love reading, he explained when she opened the package with wonder. I thought you might enjoy having something new to read. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. It had been so long since anyone had thought about what she might enjoy rather than simply what she needed to survive. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. That night, after the lanterns were lit and the evening chores completed, Clara read aloud from the poetry book while Caleb mended a bridle. The words painted pictures of love and longing, of nature and beauty, and in the warm glow of the lamplight, Clara felt something settle in her heart. This was what a life could be, not just survival, but moments of grace and gentleness woven through the hard work. As summer gave way to fall, the homestead thrived under their combined efforts. The north fence was completed and reinforced. The barn roof was repaired. They had even managed to increase the herd by 3 head, purchasing them at a fair price from a rancher who was moving back east. The garden yielded more vegetables than Clara alone could have managed, and she began preserving food for the winter with a sense of security she had not felt in a long time. The people of White Pine noticed the changes when Clara made her weekly trips to town. She smiled more readily now. The hard edge of desperation that had marked her features for months had softened, and it did not take long for gossip to spread about the young man who had come to help her, who seemed to have no plans to leave. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, cornered Clara at the general store one afternoon. "I hear you have taken in a boarder, dear." Clara bristled at the implication in the older woman's tone. "Caleb Quinn is helping me with the homestead. He knew my father." "I am sure he is very helpful, Mrs. Patterson said with a knowing look that made Clara want to snap at her. But a young woman living alone with a man to whom she is not married, well, people talk. "Let them talk," Clara said firmly. "I am managing my father's land with help from someone he trusted." There is nothing improper about it, but the conversation stayed with her, nagging at the edges of her happiness. That evening, as she and Caleb lit the lanterns together, she brought it up. "People in town are talking about us," she said. "About the impropriety of you staying here." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Do you want me to move into town? I could rent a room and ride out each day to help." "No," Clara said quickly. "That would be foolish and expensive, and I do not care what they think. But it bothers you." "It bothers me that people reduce what we have to something scandalous. You have been nothing but honorable." Caleb set down the lantern he had been lighting and turned to face her fully. "Clara, what do we have? We have never really named it." Clara felt her heart begin to race. They had been dancing around this question for weeks now, acknowledging their feelings in small ways but never speaking them aloud fully. "I do not know," she admitted. "I know that I care about you, that I look forward to seeing you every morning, and that I sleep better knowing you are here. That when you smile at me, my whole day feels brighter." "I am in love with you," Caleb said simply. The words were not flowery or elaborate, just honest and direct. "I have been falling in love with you since that first night when I saw your lanterns burning in the darkness and met the woman brave enough to light them. Every day since has only made me more certain. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you never give up on anything. I love how you talk to the chickens like they can understand you, and how you get a little line between your eyebrows when you are concentrating on something difficult. I love you, Clara Oakes." Clara felt tears slide down her cheeks, but these were not tears of grief or frustration. These were tears of joy, pure and uncomplicated. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have been too afraid to admit it even to myself, but I do. I love you, Caleb Quinn." He pulled her into his arms, and they stood there on the porch, holding each other as the last rays of sunlight faded and the lanterns cast their warm glow around them. When Caleb finally pulled back, He kept his hands on her shoulders. "Then marry me," he said. "Make this official. Not because of what people in town think, but because I want to spend every day of my life beside you. I want to build this homestead into something amazing together. I want to raise children here and grow old watching the sun set over this land. Marry me, Clara." Clara did not hesitate. "Yes." They married 3 weeks later in the small church in White Pine, with a handful of townspeople as witnesses. Clara wore a dress made from the fabric Caleb had brought her, a simple design in a deep blue that matched the Nevada sky. Caleb wore his best clothes, cleaned and pressed, his hair neatly trimmed. The ceremony was short and simple, but when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Caleb kissed her, Clara felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They celebrated with a meal at the boarding house Mrs. Patterson's earlier disapproval forgotten now that they had made things proper. The other ranchers and townspeople who attended offered congratulations and well wishes. Several of them mentioned that they had always hoped Clara would find a good man, that Thomas Oakes would have been proud. That night, they returned to the homestead as the sun was setting. Together they lit the lanterns, just as they had done every evening since Caleb arrived. But now it felt different, weighted with new meaning. These were not just safety measures anymore. They were symbols of the life they were building together, light against the darkness, warmth against the cold, hope against uncertainty. Their first year of marriage brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. The winter was harsh, with snowstorms that sometimes lasted for days. But they weathered it together, huddled by the fire, playing cards and reading and talking about their dreams for the spring. When a pack of wolves threatened the cattle, Caleb sat up for 3 nights running to guard them, and Clara sat up with him, refusing to let him face the danger alone. When spring came, they expanded the garden and purchased more cattle. Caleb proved to have a gift for working with the animals, and the herd grew healthy and strong under his care. Clara's chickens multiplied, and she started selling eggs and chickens to people in town, bringing in additional income. They worked harder than Clara had ever worked alone, but the burden was shared now, and that made all the difference. On their first wedding anniversary, Caleb surprised her with a gift. He had been working on it in secret for months, carving it from a piece of oak. It was a sign for the gate at the entrance to their property, with their names carved into the wood, Quinn Homestead. "This is our land now," he said. "Yours and mine together. I wanted to mark it as such." Clara ran her fingers over the carved letters, feeling the care that had gone into every curve and line. "It is perfect," she said. "Father would be happy to know the land is in good hands." That summer, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The realization came one morning when she was sick for the 3rd day in a row, and suddenly everything made sense. When she told Caleb, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to be parents," he said wonderingly. "Clara, we are going to have a family." The pregnancy was difficult. Clara had always been healthy and strong, but carrying a child took a toll on her body. There were days when she could barely get out of bed, when the nausea was so severe she could not keep anything down. Caleb took over more of the work, hiring a young man from town to help with the heavy labor. He was gentle and patient with Clara, bringing her water and sitting with her when the sickness was at its worst. As her belly grew, so did their excitement. They prepared the small second bedroom that had been used for storage, cleaning it out and building a cradle. Clara sewed tiny clothes from scraps of fabric, and Caleb carved wooden toys. They talked late into the night about names and futures, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. The baby came on a cold February night during a snowstorm. The midwife from town had been staying with them for 3 days, waiting for the labor to begin. When it finally did, It was long and painful. Caleb paced outside the bedroom door, hearing Clara's cries and feeling completely helpless. 18 hours after the labor began, a baby's cry finally rang through the house. The midwife emerged with a smile. "You have a son, a healthy boy with strong lungs." Caleb rushed into the bedroom to find Clara exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face, and he was the most beautiful thing Caleb had ever seen, aside from his wife. "Meet Christopher Thomas Quinn," Clara said softly. "Named for both our fathers." Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, looking at his wife and son, and felt a swell of emotion so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. This was his family. This was what he had been searching for all those years of drifting without even knowing it. A home, a purpose, people to love and protect. Christopher grew quickly, a healthy baby who rarely fussed. Clara proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving while still maintaining the firm boundaries the child needed. Caleb took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else, learning how to change diapers and soothe the baby to sleep, taking night feedings so Clara could rest. As Christopher grew from infant to toddler, the homestead continued to flourish. The cattle herd had grown to nearly 40 head, and they had added horses to their stock. Caleb had a gift for training horses, and word spread that the Quinn place had good, reliable animals for sale. People came from as far as Carson City to look at their stock. Clara's business with eggs and chickens had expanded as well. She had started making cheese from their cow's milk, and it proved popular in town. Together, their income allowed them not just to survive, but to save money, to plan for a future that seemed bright with possibility. When Christopher was 2 years old, Clara became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she sailed through it with energy and good health. Their daughter was born on a warm summer evening, arriving so quickly that Caleb barely had time to ride for the midwife. He ended up delivering his daughter himself, with only Clara's instructions to guide him. They named her Catherine Rose, and she had her mother's eyes and her father's smile. Christopher was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. The house felt full of life and love, and sometimes Clara would stand in the doorway and just watch her family, amazed at how much her life had changed from those lonely, frightening days after her father's death. The years that followed brought the normal challenges of any life. There were dry spells and wet seasons, good years for the cattle and hard years. There were childhood illnesses that had them up all night, and moments of pure terror when Christopher broke his arm falling from a tree. But through it all, Clara and Caleb faced everything together, their love deepening with each shared trial and triumph. By the time Christopher was 10 and Catherine was 8, the Quinn homestead had become one of the most successful small ranches in the area. They had built a larger barn and expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room. The original homestead that Clara's father had built was now just the core of a much larger operation. But some things never changed. Every evening at dusk, Clara still lit lanterns around the property. It was no longer strictly necessary. They had established themselves well, and the area was more settled now, less dangerous than it had been in those early days. But the ritual had become important to both of them, a reminder of where they had started, of the night when a stranger had ridden up to a homestead lit against the darkness and found his home. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Caleb and Clara stood on the porch together as the sun set, their children playing in the yard. Christopher was teaching Catherine how to rope a fence post, and their laughter rang out clear in the evening air. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if I had not ridden up that evening?" Caleb asked, his arm around Clara's waist. "Sometimes," Clara admitted. "I think I would have survived. I was determined enough, but I would not have lived. There is a difference. You taught me that it is possible to do more than just survive, to actually build a life full of joy and love. You taught me what it means to have a home," Caleb said. "I spent so many years drifting, never belonging anywhere. And then I saw your lanterns burning in the darkness, and everything changed." Clara turned in his arms to face him. 15 years of marriage had added lines to both their faces and silver threads to their hair, but when she looked at Caleb, she still saw the young man who had promised to help her, who had stayed not out of obligation but out of love. "You told me that I had lit your path," she said. "And you asked me to walk it with you. That was the best decision I ever made." "The best decision we ever made," Caleb corrected, and kissed her softly. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, they began their nightly ritual of lighting the lanterns. Christopher and Catherine joined them, each child taking responsibility for certain lanterns. It had become a family tradition, this ceremony of bringing light to the darkness. And as Clara watched her husband and children moving through the familiar motions, she felt a sense of peace and completeness that she had never imagined possible in those dark days after her father's death. The years continued to pass. Christopher grew into a fine young man, as skilled with horses as his father and as determined as his mother. He had inherited the best qualities of both his parents, along with a gentle humor that was entirely his own. Catherine was bright and curious, with a head for numbers that served them well in managing the ranch's business. When Christopher was 19, a young woman named Sarah came to White Pine with her family. She was the daughter of a new rancher who had purchased land to the south. From the moment Christopher met her, he was smitten. Clara watched her son fall in love with the same headlong certainty she had once experienced, and she found it both touching and terrifying. Sarah was a lovely girl, kind and hardworking, with a quick wit and a genuine warmth. When Christopher finally worked up the courage to bring her home for dinner, Clara and Caleb could see immediately why their son was so captivated. Over the following months, as Christopher courted Sarah with all the earnest intensity of first love, the two families grew close. Christopher proposed on a spring evening, presenting Sarah with a ring he had saved for months to buy. The wedding was held at the little church in White Pine, the same place his parents had married 20 years earlier. Clara cried through the entire ceremony, torn between joy for her son's happiness and the bittersweet knowledge that he was beginning his own life, his own journey. But Christopher and Sarah did not move far. They built a small house on the southern edge of the Quinn property, and Christopher continued to work the ranch with his father. Sarah proved to be as capable as she was kind, throwing herself into ranch life with enthusiasm. When she became pregnant the following year, Clara found herself stepping into the role her own mother had never lived to fill, helping Sarah through the challenges of pregnancy and new motherhood. The birth of Clara's first grandchild, a boy named William, brought a new dimension to her life. Holding that tiny infant, she felt the profound connection between generations, the way love multiplied and expanded to embrace new lives. William had Christopher's dark hair and Sarah's gray eyes, and Clara thought he was absolutely perfect. Catherine, meanwhile, had developed a passion for teaching. She spent time helping the overwhelmed schoolteacher in White Pine, working with the younger children, and discovered that she had a gift for it. When she was 21, she traveled to Carson City to attend a teaching college, something that would not have been possible without the financial stability Clara and Caleb had built. The house felt quiet with both children living their own lives, but Clara and Caleb found a new rhythm together. They had more time for each other, for long rides across the property, for quiet evenings reading together, for simply enjoying the life they had built. The ranch ran smoothly now, with Christopher managing much of the daily work and several hired hands helping with the larger tasks. On a warm summer evening, as they approached their 25th anniversary, Clara and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sunset. It was their favorite time of day, had been since that first evening when Caleb had ridden up and seen the lanterns burning. 25 years, Clara mused. It seems like a lifetime and no time at all. I have loved every moment of it, Caleb said. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts because we faced them together. Clara reached for his hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long familiarity. Do you remember what you said to me that night in the rain, when you told me I had lit your path? I remember every word I have ever said to you, Caleb replied, but especially those ones. I was so scared, Clara admitted. I had been alone for so long, and suddenly there you were, offering me everything I had been afraid to want. I almost said no. I almost sent you away. I am glad you did not. So am I. You have given me a beautiful life, Caleb, more than I ever dreamed possible. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Soon it would be time to light the lanterns, to continue the tradition that had defined their relationship from the beginning. But for now, they simply sat together, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life filled with light. Catherine returned from teaching college with honors and took over as the teacher in White Pine. She had a gift for inspiring children, for making them excited about learning. Clara and Caleb were immensely proud of her, though they worried about her lack of romantic interests. She seemed content with her teaching and her family, but Clara remembered her own loneliness before Caleb arrived and hoped her daughter would find someone to share her life with. The answer came in an unexpected form. A new doctor arrived in White Pine, a young man named Daniel Foster who had trained in San Francisco and wanted to bring modern medicine to the frontier towns. He was intelligent and dedicated, and when he met Catherine at a town meeting about funding for the school, the attraction was immediate and mutual. Daniel began finding excuses to visit the school, checking on the children's health, offering to give lessons on anatomy and biology. Catherine began finding excuses to visit his office, bringing students with minor ailments that probably did not require a doctor's attention. Clara and Caleb watched the courtship unfold with amusement and delight. Daniel proved to be a good man, passionate about his work and genuinely kind. When he asked for Catherine's hand, Clara and Caleb gave their blessing without hesitation. The wedding was a grand affair, with people coming from all over the county to celebrate. Catherine looked beautiful in a dress Clara had helped her sew, and Daniel could not stop smiling. They settled in White Pine, with Catherine continuing to teach and Daniel building his practice. Within a year, Catherine was pregnant, and Clara found herself anticipating another grandchild with the same joy she had felt for the first. As Clara moved into her 50s, she found herself reflecting often on the journey that had brought her to this place. The frightened young woman who had lit lanterns against the darkness seemed like a different person now, though Clara knew she was still in there somewhere, her strength and determination forged in those lonely, difficult months after her father's death. The homestead that had once been her burden was now her pride and joy. The land was productive and beautiful, carefully tended by her family. The house was full of memories, every corner holding stories of triumph and struggle, laughter and tears. And most importantly, it was full of love. Christopher and Sarah now had 3 children, with another on the way. Catherine and Daniel had 2 daughters. The ranch employed 8 workers year-round, with additional help hired during busy seasons. What had started as Clara's desperate attempt to honor her father's memory had become a thriving family legacy. But for all the growth and change, some things remained constant. Every evening at dusk, Clara still went out to light the lanterns. Caleb still joined her, though these days they moved a bit slower, their joints stiff from years of hard work. The ritual had become more symbolic than practical, but it remained important to both of them. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren planned a surprise celebration. The whole family gathered at the original homestead, now lovingly maintained as the heart of the larger ranch. There was food and music, stories and laughter. As the sun began to set, Christopher called for everyone's attention. "Dad, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We wanted to do something special for your anniversary, something that would honor not just your marriage, but the legacy you have built here." He gestured, and Sarah came forward carrying a large object covered in cloth. When she pulled the cloth away, Clara gasped. It was a painting, beautifully rendered, showing the original homestead as it had looked 30 years ago. In the foreground, a woman stood lighting lanterns as a man on horseback approached from the distance. The detail was exquisite, capturing not just the physical scene but somehow the emotion of that moment. "We commissioned this from an artist in Carson City," Catherine explained. "We told her the story of how you met, about the lanterns and the promise, and she created this. We wanted you to have something that captured the beginning of your story together." Clara felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at the painting. It was perfect, capturing a moment that had changed everything. Caleb's arm came around her shoulders and she could feel that he was equally moved. "Thank you," Clara managed to say. "All of you. This is the most wonderful gift." "You have given us so much," Christopher said. "A home, a family, a legacy of hard work and love. This seemed like a small thing in comparison." "It is not small," Caleb said, his voice rough. "It is everything." As the celebration continued into the evening, Clara found a quiet moment to stand apart and look at her family. Her children and their spouses, her grandchildren playing together, even some of the ranch workers who had become like family over the years. All of this had grown from that one night when she had lit lanterns against the darkness, and a stranger had ridden into her life with a promise and a good heart. She thought about her father, wishing he could have seen all of this, could have known the life that had grown from the foundation he had laid. But in a way, she thought he did know. Every nail he had hammered, every fence post he had planted, every lesson he had taught her had contributed to this moment. His dream had not died with him. It had flourished beyond anything he could have imagined. Caleb found her there, watching their family. He did not say anything, just stood beside her in the comfortable silence they had perfected over 3 decades together. Finally, Clara spoke. "Thank you for riding up to my homestead that evening," she said. "Thank you for seeing something worth staying for." "Thank you for lighting those lanterns," Caleb replied. "Thank you for being brave enough to let me stay." As the stars began to appear overhead and the lanterns cast their warm glow across the gathering, Clara and Caleb joined their family. There would be more challenges ahead, more changes and surprises. Life never stopped moving forward. But whatever came, they would face it together, guided by the same love that had brought them through the past 30 years. The years continued their steady march. Clara and Caleb moved into their 60s, gradually handing over more of the ranch's daily operations to Christopher and his family. They had earned their rest, though neither of them was content to sit idle. Caleb still worked with the horses, his touch as gentle and sure as ever despite his age. Clara still tended her garden and her chickens, still made the cheese that had become locally famous. Their grandchildren grew, each one developing their own personality and dreams. William, Christopher's oldest, showed a passion for ranching that promised to carry the family legacy into another generation. Catherine's daughters were both bright and curious, one interested in following her mother into teaching, the other fascinated by her father's medical work. When Clara turned 65, Caleb planned a special celebration. He had been working on something in secret for months, and on her birthday, he led her out to the original homestead building. Inside, he had created a small museum of sorts, preserving artifacts and memories from their life together. There were photographs, tools, pieces of furniture that had been their first possessions. In the center of the room stood the cradle Caleb had built for Christopher, lovingly maintained and now a symbol of the family that had grown from it. "I wanted to make sure our story was preserved," Caleb explained, "so that our grandchildren and their children will know where they came from, what it took to build this life." Clara walked through the room, touching objects that held decades of memories. Her father's old hat hanging on a peg, the first fence post Caleb had cut, the lantern that had hung on the porch that very first night. Each item was labeled with a small card explaining its significance. "This is beautiful," Clara said, her voice breaking with emotion. "It is our whole life right here." "Not our whole life," Caleb corrected gently. "Just the beginning. The story is still being written." But they both knew that the story, at least their chapter of it, was nearing its conclusion. They had lived well and fully, had built something that would outlast them. It was more than most people could say. On a crisp autumn evening, as they sat on the porch watching another sunset, Clara felt a strange sense of completion. She was 70 years old now, and Caleb was 73. They had been married for 45 years, had built a life beyond anything she could have imagined that night when her father died and she stood alone and afraid. "You have any regrets?" she asked Caleb suddenly. He considered the question seriously, as he did with everything. "Small ones, perhaps. I wish I had found you sooner so we could have had even more time together. I wish your father could have known me, could have seen what we built from his dream. But real regrets, things I would change if I could, no. This life with you has been everything I could have wanted." "I feel the same," Clara said. "Sometimes I think about how different things could have been. If you had not come that evening, if I had sent you away, if we had not been brave enough to love each other. So many moments where everything could have gone a different direction. But it did not. We chose each other, again and again, and look what we created." Clara reached for his hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of decades of practice. They sat together as the sun painted the sky with color, as it had done thousands of times before. Soon it would be time to light the lanterns, to continue the tradition that had defined their life together. But tonight, before they rose to begin that familiar ritual, Clara simply sat with her husband and felt grateful. Grateful for the courage to light those lanterns all those years ago. Grateful for the stranger who had ridden up to her door with a promise and stayed because of love. Grateful for every hard day and every joyful moment that had brought them to this place. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they rose together to light the lanterns. Their movements were slower now, their hands less steady, but the ritual was as meaningful as it had ever been. As each lantern flickered to life, Clara thought about all the nights they had done this together, all the times they had brought light to the darkness. The last lantern lit, they stood together on the porch, looking out at the land they had built their lives upon. The original small homestead had grown into something magnificent, a thriving ranch that supported their family and employed many others. But more than that, It was a testament to what was possible when two people committed to building a life together. "You lit my path," Caleb said softly, echoing the words he had spoken so many years ago. "And I am so grateful you chose to walk it with me." "It was the easiest choice I ever made," Clara replied, "and the best." They stood there as the night deepened around them, the lanterns burning bright, two people who had found each other in the darkness and created a life full of light. And in that moment, Clara felt a profound sense of peace. Their story had been a good one, full of love and laughter, hard work and triumph. Whatever time they had left, they would face it together, just as they always had. The years rolled on with the steady certainty of the seasons. Clara and Caleb moved into their mid-70s, their bodies showing the wear of lives lived fully and worked hard. But their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other, if anything, had deepened with time. They spent their days in quiet contentment, watching their grandchildren grow and begin families of their own, marveling at how quickly the years had passed. William, true to his early promise, had become an excellent rancher. He married a strong-willed young woman named Emma, and together they managed the day-to-day operations of the ranch with skill and dedication. They gave Clara and Caleb 3 great-grandchildren, and Clara found herself amazed that she had lived long enough to see the 4th generation of her family. Catherine's daughter Margaret followed her grandfather's love of horses and became a renowned trainer, her reputation spreading throughout Nevada and beyond. Her sister Helen did indeed become a doctor, studying with her father, and then pursuing further education in San Francisco, before returning to practice in White Pine alongside him. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the family gathered for a grand celebration. Over 100 people attended, a testament to the impact Clara and Caleb had made on their community. There were speeches and toasts, stories shared about the couple who had built one of the most successful ranches in the region through hard work and devotion to each other. But the moment Clara treasured most came that evening, when everyone else had left, and it was just her and Caleb sitting on the porch in the gathering darkness. They had lit the lanterns together, moving slowly but completing the ritual that had become sacred to them. As they sat down, Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. "You remember when we first met?" he asked. "When I told you about the promise I had made to your father, of course. You said you owed him your life." "I never showed you this," Caleb said, unfolding the paper carefully. "I have carried it with me for over 50 years now." Clara leaned closer to see in the lantern light. It was a letter, written in her father's familiar handwriting. The paper was worn from years of being carried and read, but the words were still clear. "Caleb," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone and you have made good on your promise to help if I ever needed it. I want you to know something I could never quite say to your face. When you told me you would come if I needed help, I believed you. You are the kind of man who keeps his promises. But more than that, you are the kind of man I would want for my Clara. If anything ever happens to me, I hope you will watch out for her. She is strong and capable, but everyone needs someone to stand beside them. You have honor and kindness, and those are the qualities that matter most. If something should grow between you and Clara, you have my blessing. Build a good life together. That would bring me more peace than anything else could. Your friend, Thomas Oakes." Clara felt tears streaming down her face as she finished reading. "He knew," she whispered. "Somehow he knew." "I think he hoped," Caleb said gently. "And I think he was a very good judge of character, both yours and mine. When I rode up that evening and saw you standing there, so strong and determined despite everything you had been through, I knew why Thomas had spoken of you with such pride. And when you lit those lanterns, creating safety and light against the darkness, I knew I had found something I had been searching for my whole life without realizing it. "We were so lucky to find each other," Clara said. "Lucky, yes, but also brave. You were brave enough to trust me. I was brave enough to stay. We were both brave enough to love each other when it would have been easier to play it safe." They sat together in the warm glow of the lanterns, this couple who had weathered 50 years of life together. They had faced drought and storm, loss and celebration, hardship and joy. They had raised children and watched those children raise children of their own. They had built not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of love and hard work that would continue long after they were gone. As the years moved into their late 70s, and then early 80s, Clara and Caleb's pace slowed further. They spent most of their days on the porch of the original homestead, which had been completely renovated and transformed into a comfortable retirement cottage for them. Their family visited often, bringing news of the ranch and the outside world, but Clara and Caleb were content to live quietly, focused on each other and the simple pleasures of their long life together. They still lit the lanterns every evening. It took longer now, with their stiff joints and failing eyesight, but they refused to let anyone else take over this task. It was their ritual, the thread that connected them to that first evening when everything had changed. On a warm spring evening, when Clara was 82 and Caleb was 85, they sat together on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and golds, and it was time to light the lanterns. But Caleb seemed particularly tired that evening, and Clara suggested they rest a bit longer before beginning their ritual. "No," Caleb said softly. "Let us light them now. I want to see them burning bright." So they rose together, moving slowly, and began their familiar pattern. Clara lit the lantern on the left post, Caleb the one on the right. They moved to the fence, to the old cottonwood tree, to each familiar spot. By the time they finished, both were exhausted, but the homestead glowed with warm light against the gathering darkness. They sat back down, and Caleb took Clara's hand. His grip was weak, and she could feel him trembling slightly. "Are you all right?" she asked with concern. "I am perfect," he said, and smiled at her with such love that it took her breath away. "I am sitting with the woman I have loved for over 50 years, watching the sun set on the land we built our life upon. How could I be anything but perfect?" "You are sentimental tonight," Clara said, but she squeezed his hand gently. "I am grateful tonight. Every night, really, but especially tonight. You gave me everything, Clara. A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me a life worth living." "We gave each other that," Clara said. "Neither of us could have built this alone." They sat together as the stars began to appear, the lanterns burning bright around them. Caleb's head slowly tipped to rest against Clara's shoulder, and she could feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing. She sat very still, not wanting to disturb this peaceful moment. When Christopher and his family arrived an hour later for their regular evening visit, they found Clara still sitting on the porch, still holding Caleb's hand. But Caleb had passed peacefully, his head on his wife's shoulder, surrounded by the light of the lanterns they had lit together one last time. The grief was profound and overwhelming. Clara had lost her partner of 53 years, her best friend, the man who had given her everything she could have wanted from life. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, a testament to the life Caleb had lived and the respect he had earned. He was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, a place where he could eternally watch over the land he had loved. In the days and weeks that followed, Clara found herself moving through life in a fog. Everything reminded her of Caleb. Every sunset brought the painful reminder that he was not there to light the lanterns with her. Her children worried about her, afraid that she would not be able to go on without the man who had been her constant companion for more than half a century. But Clara was made of stronger stuff than that. She grieved deeply and honestly, letting herself feel the full weight of her loss. And slowly, painfully, she began to find her way forward. She had lived for 22 years before Caleb came into her life, and she had been strong then. She would find that strength again, not to replace what she had lost, but to honor it. Every evening at dusk, Clara went out to light the lanterns. Her hands shook more now, and the task took longer, but she did it faithfully. Christopher offered to take over the duty, but Clara refused. This was her ritual, her connection to the man she had loved, her way of keeping his memory alive. "You lit my path," she would whisper into the darkness as she lit each lantern. "And I walked it with you for as long as I could. Thank you for every step." Clara lived for 3 more years after Caleb's death. They were quiet years, spent mostly with family, watching her great-grandchildren grow, seeing the ranch continue to thrive. She spent hours in the little museum Caleb had created, running her hands over the objects that held their shared history. She reread the letter her father had written, marveling again at his wisdom and foresight. On what would have been her and Caleb's 56th anniversary, Clara woke feeling strangely peaceful. She dressed carefully, putting on the blue dress she had worn to their wedding, carefully preserved all these years. She spent the day visiting with her children and grandchildren, telling stories of her life with Caleb, laughing at happy memories. That evening, as the sun began to set, she asked Christopher and Catherine to help her outside. Together, they lit the lanterns one final time, Clara's children supporting her as she touched each familiar lamp. When the last one was lit and the homestead glowed bright against the darkness, Clara smiled. "It is beautiful," she said. "He would have loved to see it." "He does see it, Mom," Catherine said softly. "I am sure of it." Clara was laid to rest beside Caleb on the hill overlooking the ranch. Her funeral was as well attended as his had been, the community coming together to honor a woman who had become a legend in her own right. The story of the young widow who had lit lanterns against the darkness and found love with a cowboy who had come to honor a debt had been told and retold, becoming part of local lore. But Clara and Caleb's real legacy was not in stories or legends. It was in the thriving ranch that bore their name, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their values forward. It was in the tradition that continued every evening at dusk, when someone from the family would go out to light the lanterns, keeping alive the ritual that had defined their ancestors' love. William took over as the primary manager of the Quinn Ranch, running it with the same dedication his grandparents had shown. He made sure the original homestead was maintained as a family treasure, keeping the museum Caleb had created and adding to it over the years. The painting of Clara lighting the lanterns as Caleb rode up hung in a place of honor, and every member of the family knew the story behind it. The tradition of lighting lanterns at dusk was passed down through the generations. Each member of the family, as they came of age, would spend an evening with their elders learning the ritual and hearing the story of Clara and Caleb. It became a rite of passage, a way of connecting to the family's roots. As the years turned into decades and the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the Quinn Ranch adapted and grew. But the core values that Clara and Caleb had established remained constant. Hard work, integrity, devotion to family, and the courage to build something lasting. These were the true inheritance they left behind, worth more than any amount of land or money. The lanterns still burn at dusk on the Quinn Ranch, over a century after Clara first lit them out of fear and necessity. They burn not out of fear now, but out of love and remembrance. They are a reminder that light can be found even in the darkest times, that courage and love can transform fear into hope, that two people who commit to walking a path together can build something that lasts forever. And sometimes, on warm summer evenings when the Nevada sun sets in a blaze of color, locals swear they can see two figures on the porch of the old homestead, sitting side by side, watching the lanterns burn bright against the gathering darkness, together for all eternity.